Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. 30 years of looking at painted surfaces teaches you things that aren't in any curriculum. You learn to read paint the way a doctor reads an X-ray. Not just what's on the surface, but what's underneath. What the surface is doing to conceal or reveal what came before it. You learn the specific language of aging paint, the way a varnish yellows, and the way a ground cracks, and the particular quality of a brushstroke that was made with confidence versus one that was corrected. You learn what paint can do and what it cannot do, and the cannot do becomes as solid a category as anything in your professional knowledge, as certain as physics, as certain as the behavior of light. I want to establish that before I describe what happened with the Staves painting, because what I'm going to describe is going to read as the account of someone who is seeing things, and I need you to have the baseline of what 30 years of professional visual attention looks like before I tell you what that attention found. Irene Staves called my firm in April. She'd acquired a large oil painting from an estate sale, a rural landscape, substantial in size, field and sky, and a tree line at the far end of the composition. And she wanted it assessed for condition and restored if the assessment warranted it. The painting had been stored in the estate for an indeterminate period. The estate had been empty for approximately 30 years. No provenance documentation had come with it. No signature was visible on the front, and she hadn't thought to check the back. I drove out the following week. Irene's house was a converted farmhouse, well maintained, with the high-ceilinged rooms that made large paintings practical rather than oppressive. The painting was already hung in the main room on the wall she'd acquired it for. She'd been right that it filled the wall. It was roughly 5 feet by 7, larger than most privately held oils I dealt with, and the scale of it gave the composition an authority it might not have had at a smaller size. I looked at it for a long time before I said anything. The subject was simple: a field in late daylight, the specific warm flatness of dusk, with a tree line at the far end, running across approximately the top third of the composition. Sky above the trees, field below, a quality of stillness in the grass that the painter had achieved through horizontal brushwork laid in thin successive layers. Competent work. Not exceptional, not the kind of painting that belonged in a collection with a name attached to it, but made with genuine skill and genuine attention to the quality of the light. No signature on the front. I checked the back when I took it down for my initial examination. Nothing. No gallery label, no provenance sticker, no identifying marks of any kind. The canvas was old. I estimated early to mid-20th century from the weave and the ground composition, though I'd need to run the physical analysis to confirm. The varnish was clouded with age in a way that would respond well to cleaning. I told Irene the painting was in reasonable condition and worth restoring, and quoted her a timeline of 3 to 4 weeks for a full treatment. She said to go ahead. I set up my equipment in the main room: daylight balanced lighting, a workstation, photographic documentation setup, and began the systematic process of recording the painting's current state before touching it. I took my initial documentation photographs on a Thursday afternoon. On Friday morning, I looked at the photographs from the day before, and then I looked at the painting, and I looked at the photographs again. The tree line was not where it had been on Thursday. Not dramatically, not where it had been. A matter of inches in the photograph, which translated to a matter of feet in the painted space of the composition. The tree line had shifted toward the foreground by a distance I estimated at roughly 4 to 5 feet if you were standing in the field the painting depicted. Small, the kind of thing that would be invisible to someone looking at the painting once and looking at it again the following day. The kind of thing that was only visible because I had a calibrated photographic record from the previous afternoon, and I was comparing it against the painting with the specific attention of someone whose job was to see exactly this kind of thing. I checked my equipment. The lighting was in the same position. The camera had not moved. I reshot the documentation photographs from the same marks I'd made on the floor and compared the new images against the old on my laptop screen. The tree line was closer to the foreground in the painting than it had been in Thursday's photographs. The distance was consistent across every comparative angle. I spent a long time at my workstation doing everything except the thing I was thinking about, which was whether the tree line had moved or whether I was experiencing a failure of professional perception that would be embarrassing to report to anyone. I checked the photographs 3 more times. I examined the paint surface under magnification at the area of the tree line's leading edge, looking for evidence of recent work, wet paint, disturbed varnish, anything that would suggest the painting had been physically altered overnight. The varnish was uniformly aged. The paint was dry. Nothing had been applied to the surface. I noted the discrepancy in my work log in neutral language. Tree line position inconsistent with Thursday documentation, and continued the assessment. Over the following 2 weeks, I documented changes on 11 separate mornings. I want to describe them precisely because precision is what the record requires. The tree line moved. Not every night. On 4 mornings, the comparison showed no measurable change. But on the 7 nights it moved toward the foreground consistently. The cumulative distance measured from my initial Thursday documentation to the end of the second week was approximately 30 feet in the painting's spatial terms. 30 feet closer to the viewer's position, 30 feet closer to the edge of the canvas. The light changed. This was subtler and harder to document quantifiably, but I documented it anyway. The dust quality of the original had a particular warm flatness that I'd noted in my initial assessment. Over the 2 weeks, the light shifted, not in color temperature exactly, but in directionality, as though the light source had moved or the time of day depicted had changed by some small increment. The shadows at the tree line's base, which had been soft and diffuse in the original, had developed an edge, the kind of edge that shadows get when the light source is lower, when the day is further along towards dark. The grass changed. This one took me the better part of the first week to identify because it wasn't a positional change, and my eye kept trying to file it under paint condition, aging, varnish reaction, something in the ground layer responding to temperature. But the change was in the texture of the painted grass in the middle ground of the field, a specific quality in the horizontal brushwork that I can only describe as weight. The grass in the original had the lightness of late-day grass, the specific thin quality of paint laid over a well-prepared surface with confidence. What the grass had developed by the end of the first week was a heaviness, a density in the paint layer that was different from the surrounding area in a way I could see under magnification and couldn't explain through any mechanism I knew. On the 10th morning, I found something in the shadows at the tree line's edge. It wasn't there in any of the previous documentation. I went back through every photograph to confirm. The area of shadow at the base of the trees, where the tree line met the field, had developed a quality of depth in the previous 3 days, a darkness that read as recession, as space going back, as the tree line having an interior rather than being a flat painted boundary. And in that recession, in the shadow at the edge of the tree line that was now noticeably closer to the foreground than it had been on the first Thursday, there was a shape, not a figure, not anything with defined edges or recognizable form, a quality of presence in the shadow that was different from the shadow itself, a density within the darkness that the surrounding darkness didn't have. I looked at it under the highest magnification my equipment allowed, and I could see that the paint in that small area was different from the surrounding paint in the tree line. Older, by the look of it, applied at a different time, with different material, as though it had been in the composition from the beginning, underneath everything else, waiting for the tree line to recede far enough to reveal it. I closed my work log and sat in Irene's main room and looked at the painting without any equipment between me and it. I looked at it for a long time. Then I started trying to find out where it came from. The estate the painting had come from was a property that had been in a single family for several generations and had passed into the hands of an estate management company when the last family member died, without immediate heirs. The management company had cleared and sold the contents over a period of months, and the sale at which Irene had acquired the painting was one of several such sales from the estate's accumulated possessions. The family name was Orvath. I found it through the estate sale company's records, which Irene had kept, and from there through county property records. The Orvath family had owned the property since the early 20th century. The last resident had been a man named Peter Orvath, who had died in 1991 after living alone on the property for the preceding 30 years. No family members, no estate documentation beyond the property and its contents. I found one useful thing. In a county library archive, in the physical records of an estate inventory conducted in 1962, a routine inventory associated with a property tax assessment, there was a line item for the painting. It was described as large oil landscape, unsigned, main room, value nominal. Below the description, in the same hand, but added separately, as though it had been noted as an afterthought or discovered after the fact, was a single instruction: covered storage after dark, as per family practice. Covered storage after dark, as per family practice. The Orvath family had owned the painting since at least 1962 and had a practice of covering it after dark that was established enough to be noted as family practice, which meant the practice predated 1962 and had been maintained long enough to become the kind of thing that got mentioned in a tax assessment inventory, as a matter of course. They had known something about it. For at least a generation, they had known something about it, and the practice they had developed was covering it, rather than disposing of it, which raised a question I didn't have an answer to, whether covering it contained whatever was happening or whether covering it simply meant they didn't have to watch. I drove back to Irene's house that evening, and I stayed. I want to describe what I saw after midnight with the same precision I've used for everything else. I owe the record that, and I owe myself the discipline of not drifting into language that obscures what actually happened. I positioned myself in the main room with the painting in full view. Under my documentation lighting, I had my camera, I had my work log, I had the comparative photographs from the previous 2 weeks arranged on my laptop. I sat in the chair I'd been using as my work position throughout the assessment, approximately 12 feet from the painting's surface, and I waited. At approximately 11, the light in the painting changed. Not a dramatic change. The shift I'd been documenting over 2 weeks happened in real time. A fractional movement in the directionality of the depicted light. The shadows at the tree line's base gaining another degree of edge. I watched it happen. The paint did not move. There was no wet quality to the surface, no visible application of anything. The change happened in the paint as it existed, dried and aged and varnished, in the same way that a room changes when a cloud passes over the sun, not through physical alteration, but through a shift in the quality of what the light was doing. I photographed it throughout. I noted the time of each change in my log. I kept my attention on the tree line. At some point after midnight, the shape in the shadow at the tree line's edge was closer. I do not have a precise time for this because I was watching it and I still cannot identify the moment at which it changed. I was looking at the area of shadow where I documented the presence, and then I was looking at an area of shadow that was different. Not different in the way of a thing that had moved, but different in the way of a thing that had always been in the new position, and I had simply not correctly perceived its position before. Like a trick of focus, like the way a word you've been misreading suddenly resolves into what it actually says, and you cannot recover the misreading. It was closer to the edge of the tree line, closer to the foreground, closer to the painting's surface, if that was a direction that meant anything. I looked at it, and it had the quality of something that was also looking. I can't be more specific than that. I am aware that looking is a quality I was projecting onto a paint surface in a domestic interior at 1 in the morning, and that the projection was doing work my professional perception should have corrected for. I've sat with that caveat for the months since, and I haven't been able to make it stick. What I was looking at had the quality of something that was looking back, not alertly, not with urgency, with the patient quality of something that had been looking for a very long time and had recently found the looking returned. I gathered my equipment and I left. I called Irene the following morning and told her I needed to make a recommendation about the painting that went beyond the restoration scope of the original commission. She asked what I meant. I told her the painting had some unusual characteristics that I couldn't fully explain through standard conservation analysis, and that my recommendation was that it be stored covered and not displayed in any room where it would be present overnight. I told her this as clearly as I could in language that didn't require her to accept anything I wasn't confident she would accept, which meant I told her less than I knew and more than I was comfortable disclosing. She said she'd bought the painting specifically to hang in that room, and she wasn't sure she understood my concern. I said the covered storage recommendation was precautionary, and that I was happy to explain my analysis documentation if she wanted to review it. She said she'd think about it and get back to me. She didn't get back to me for 2 weeks, and when she did, it was not about covered storage. She'd had a decorator in to look at the room, and the decorator had a client who collected large format landscapes and had expressed immediate interest in the painting when the decorator mentioned it, and Irene had sold it because the offer was good, and she'd found something else for the wall she liked better. The painting had been collected already. 3 days before her call to me, I asked if she had the new owner's contact information. She said she'd passed along my assessment documentation with the sale. The first 2 weeks of documentation, the part without the midnight observations, the condition report, and the cleaning recommendation. I asked if she had the buyer's name. She gave me a name and an address, and I wrote them down, and I looked at what I'd written for a moment. I sent a letter to the address the following day. I explained that I'd been engaged to restore the painting and had additional assessment documentation beyond what had been passed along with the sale, and that I would like to share it with the new owner at their convenience. I included my contact information. I said the documentation contained some findings that I thought the new owner should be aware of. That was 6 weeks ago. The letter hasn't been answered. I'm still in the field. I have other commissions, other paintings, other surfaces that need the kind of attention I know how to give them. I go to work and I look closely at the things I'm paid to look at, and I use what 30 years has given me, which is an understanding of what paint can do and what it cannot do. I've added a category. What I knew before was the cannot do. Paint cannot move. Paint cannot change. A dry varnish surface is a fixed record of a series of decisions made in the past, and its fixedness is one of the things that makes the work of restoration meaningful. You are working with what was done. The past is the past, and the paint is its record. What I know now is that the cannot do has an edge to it I hadn't previously tested, and that the edge is somewhere in the specific territory of a painting brought from estate storage into a well-lit room and examined by someone who knew how to look. I've thought about the Orvath family's practice. Covered storage after dark, maintained for long enough to become family practice, which meant maintained for long enough to become the kind of thing you didn't explain to a county assessor because the county assessor either already knew or wouldn't understand. Maintained, presumably, because it helped, because covering the painting at night was better than not covering it. Better, I think, because covering it meant not watching it, because whatever the watching produced in the painting, in whatever was using the painting as whatever a painting could be used as, required the watching to produce it, required a viewer, required the sustained professional attention of someone who knew how to look at a surface and keep looking until the surface gave up what it contained. The Orvath family had managed it for generations by simply not looking. I'd looked every day for 2 weeks under calibrated documentation lighting. I think about where the tree line is now, how much further it's moved in the 6 weeks since I stopped documenting it. I think about the shape in the shadow at its edge and whether it's still at the edge, and what the word edge means for something that's been moving toward the foreground for for as long as the painting has existed. I think about the unanswered letter. I've started drafting a second one. I don't know if it will help. I know that the person who has the painting now is not someone who knows how to look at it, which means they won't see what I saw, which means the watching won't be sustained, which might be enough. Might be. The Orvath family managed it for generations. All they did was stop looking. I've been trying to stop looking since April. Some nights, it's easier than others.